Hello, everyone. Uh, thanks for joining me here. Uh, I just wanted to follow up on the great discussion that we had. This was Tuesday, and now I'm losing track of my dates, but it was either at the end of November or the beginning of December, just this past week. Um, and I think that the way to frame this was, well, the question was, when we're talking about inflation, isn't it true that more money creates more inflation? And or has something gotten lost? And I think that if I may just um, uh, sorry about that. Okay, so let me just move my face here. Okay, so in fact, what happened was that um, that sometime back in the course, we introduced um, the idea that Milton Friedman, probably the greatest economist here, I should probably not put myself next to him, I'll put myself below him, one of the greatest economists who ever lived, um, emphasized that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Okay, and we discussed. Okay, we used the equation of exchange, the MV equals PQ, except we inverted it. Okay, well, no, we didn't invert it. We took MV, money demand is equal to PY or PQ. This is nominal output here, so it's a real output times the price level, and we divide it through by velocity, okay, because velocity is by definition the ratio of nominal output to money. And then we noted that so long as as velocity remains constant and it's chosen by market participants exogenously, and that our output is also exogenous, it's determined by our technology. What that meant is that if we flip the equation that I just showed you before, if we had, let's say, a 1% change in money, we would have an exact 1% change in the price level. And that, in that sense, money is here a monetary phenomenon. Okay, or I'm sorry, inflation. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. So now the question is, do we want to extend that? Okay. Now the thing is that, okay, since this was back in week 7, and since week 7, the story became more complicated. But I think that the great virtue of the question was that we need to reassure ourselves that money still matters for inflation, although probably in a little different sense. So how are we going to do this? Okay, we're going to take several steps. Okay, first of all, we're going to go back and link our changes in money to changes in the interest rate. We're going to examine a monetary intervention. Okay, then, okay, we're going to do this in money supply and money demand space, and that's exactly what we did in week 9. Then we're going to skip ahead to week 11, where we talk about our real Taylor rule, monetary intervention, and we're going to show that a monetary intervention, an increase in the money supply, we're going to display it a little bit differently. We're going to show that as a shift in this real Taylor rule, bringing down interest rates, but it's all consistent. Then we're going to remind ourselves that lower interest rates will bring about more demand, an increase in aggregate demand, and we did that in week 11. And then that'll mean an increase in the output gap. And once we do that, okay, we go to the Phillips curve, and we notice that we already established that what the Phillips curves tells us is that an increase, all else equal, an increase in the output gap, more demand, is going to push up some prices, and some of those prices are going to be higher prices, and higher costs are going to be passed on to consumers in the form of higher purchase prices. That's inflation. So we're going to get that, and we're going to put everything together. But I want to assure you that everything is consistent, but modified with what Milton Friedman told us. So let's go next here. Okay, so I'm going to have you, actually I have this already open here. I'm going to go to the, let's see, I'm going to go here to to your dashboard here. Okay, and I want to do courses, and I want to do this, and I want to, let me just shift in here to show you exactly where we're going here. We're going to go to the chapter on monetary regimes, and we're going to open up the monetary regime dashboard here, and I'm going to download this. Okay. Okay, sorry if you saw some of my songs here. My other thing is music. And we're going to look at an intervention. And an intervention is where we where the central bank decides, independent of anything else, it's kind of an autonomous ship. It decides in this case to increase money. And I think that if we increase it by 5%, no, that's not, that's too much. Okay, let's say 1%. There we go. So we have a 1% increase in money supply, and you could see previously the equilibrium interest rate was up here around 5%, but as the central bank increases the supply of money, people would like to take some of that extra money and use it to purchase interest-bearing instruments, use it to purchase bonds. The price of bonds will go up, the interest rate will go down until we get money market re-equilibrated. So once again, okay, the key lesson here is that it is this interest rate which clears the money market, and what we've seen is that this intervention, increasing money, will reduce interest rates. Now, I want to caution you that we're assuming here that prices are sort of fixed. Okay, they're not completely flexible in the way that they were in Milton Friedman's initial, the classical theory, okay, where prices were perfectly flexible and they just moved immediately. No, you have to have some price fixity here, okay? So then the next thing I want to do is I want to go back here, and I want to now show you that if we want to get an intervention, okay, we can also use this real Taylor rule, okay, although I've got the nominal interest rate here, but it's the same on the real, is that you have a discretionary, and in this case, you have a discretionary decrease in the interest rate, okay, which will bring down the interest rate. That is implicitly what is going on with this intervention, is that the central bank is increasing the money supply. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go back to our so folks, what I have done is I've opened up our I've opened up our dashboard, which has the ISRTPC model. Okay, so and just for now, I want you to focus on this blue line here, which is the real Taylor rule. So we have output gap space here, and we have the real interest rate over here. And then the idea is that if we have an increase in the money supply, I'm going to do this under Alt 1, okay, we can think of this as a discretionary adjustment or an intervention by the central bank, And so if the money supply goes up, interest rate will go down. We'll just put in a nice number here, 1%. Okay? And everybody will see that now. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. Okay? So yes, we've seen this blue curve, which we've learned about as sort of reflecting and summarizing the objectives of the central bank. But we've also noted that this curve can incorporate interventions by the central bank, and these interventions stepping in for reasons independent of the model, independent of what's going on in the model, and raising or lowering interest rates. And behind the scenes, this means changes in the money supply. So in this case, a lower interest rate means an increase in the money supply. Okay. So then the next thing that I want us to note, if I may go back to my slides for a second here, the next thing that I want us to note is the IS curve. Okay, we talked about this also in week 11. Okay, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back now to this our dashboard here. Okay, and I'm going to say, all right, okay, now let's focus in on the IS curve, which is this downward sloping red line. And remember, once again, we have the interest rate on the horizontal axis, the vertical axis, and the output gap on the horizontal axis. So what this tells us is that when interest rates fall, that stimulates demand. That encourages people to spend more. It encourages businesses to invest more. The price of their credit is cheaper. The opportunity cost of their capital is cheaper. It can also, if you expand the model, make it a little bit richer, encourage consumption. So it's all in the same direction. So you can see that by moving down along this IS curve, we're encouraging more expenditures, and GDP is going up. Okay. So then, if I may, just a second, let's go now to the next slide here. Okay. And just to remind you here, we learned about this, okay, several weeks ago. The idea is that you have a higher output gap. Okay, people demand more, and we're assuming away any kind of supply shock. There's no supply shock here. Forget about supply chains. Okay, we have higher output gap. Okay, that means that holding all else equal here, including the expectations on inflation, we will observe higher inflation rates. Once again, why? As people demand more, some costs rise for suppliers, and some of those costs are passed on in the form of higher prices to consumers, to purchasers. So let's go back here and let's have a look here at our model, and you can see already, okay, we'll go down here, that simply by having stimulated demand, we have a higher output gap, but we will also have a higher inflation rate. Okay, we will have a higher inflation rate. Okay, now you'll notice that there's a little tiny offset here, because as the inflation rate rises, the central bank is actually going to offset just a tiny bit. That's reflected in this upward movement along this dotted red line. Okay, but once again, that should not detract from the big picture here. This was an increase in money supply. An increase in money supply encouraged more demand, and higher demand, higher output gap meant more inflation. So now, I think our final question here would have to be something along these lines. Okay, what would Milton Friedman say about this? Would he like or not like our analysis? And my answer is he would probably be okay with it. And he would be, I think, especially be okay with our Phillips curve, which contains expectations. In fact, if you look up the Phillips Wikipedia on Phillips curve, you will often notice that there's something called the Friedman-Phelps Phillips curve. Milton Friedman along and not maybe a little bit independently, but with Edmund Phelps of Columbia University, who is still alive and who won the Nobel Prize in 2006, they're jointly credited with putting the expectations element into the Phillips curve. So A.W. Phillips back in the 50s, no expectations. Okay, but Phelps and Friedman put those guys in. This is a picture of Ned Phelps. So then the trick that I want to emphasize is a very big and a very contentious question: is how, in fact, are expectations determined? And it's a very difficult question. We've touched upon it, although I haven't had so much time to emphasize it in this course. But once again, folks, what I do want to emphasize is that that our model, even though it's a little bit more complicated, with a little bit more complicated channel of transmission here, because we're going through several things, and hopefully the graphical model helps you understand that. Still, money and inflation are linked. Okay? Thank you very much.